fight together, see we do it right together. Can we do it? Yes, we can.
Each man must do his bit.
Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and on this series of programs, we examine matters which every Guyanese should be concerned about, whether you're living at home or in the diaspora. And on this occasion, we look at environmental security. And I would like to tell you about some words used by a resident of All Boys Town. I don't like calling names on the program, but I believe she wouldn't mind if I said that Trisha Banks, who lives in All Boys Town, there's a flood in April. And these were her words. I mean, the way she expressed her emotions so eloquently. I feel all Guyanese would share the way she felt. And her words were, "You're sick and tired of this. Every time a little rain falls, the streets flooding out and the water reaching in my bottom house. It is very unsafe and unhealthy because I have little children living with me. The government needs to do better than this because it is fatiguing." This is what she had to say after a 1 hour rainfall on the 21st of April. And in that 1 hour, there were floods in 4 regions on the coast. In West Demerara, Essequibo Islands, Region 3, in Demerara, Mahaica, Region 4, in Mahaica, Berbice, Region 5, and East Berbice County in Region 6, especially in low-lying areas. Businesses and schools had to be closed in some parts of Georgetown City. 1 hour of rain. So it is not a prolonged flood as we've had in the past. So something is wrong that our country, particularly the coastline, could not respond to 1 hour of rainfall to protect our residents from this discomfort. And Trisha Banks spoke for many, many residents, not only in Georgetown, but throughout the country. And her words, although they refer to one ward of Georgetown, could be applied to other regions of Guyana, but we're just speaking about 4 regions. When we speak about environmental security, we're speaking about the threat to human beings. This is not just to cokers and dams and seawalls. Human beings are made uncomfortable every year because the rains in May, June never fail. That is an axiom in Guyanese geography. The May, June rains never fail. And what was forecast in April 2023 is that the season, the rainy season, will be ominous and ruinous. Rainfall and flash floods are expected to peak. Water levels in conservancies, reservoirs, and rivers are likely to surge. The Hydromet Service has predicted high energy waves, which may result in overtopping and damage to sea defenses and flooding in low-lying areas. There we have it. There we have it. And wherever you're living in Guyana, not only on the coastline or in low-lying areas, but even in the hinterland, you will find that you will be exposed during this May-June season to extraordinary flooding. When we speak about environmental security also, we have to think about coastal zone management, particularly those of us who live on the coastline. We need to bear in mind that in Guyana, we're exposed to risks and threats because many or much of our effort is expended on mitigation and not on prevention. And there are measures which I agree would make people more comfortable um, during or after a flood. But we need to pay more attention to prevention because every region of this country is susceptible to flooding, as we saw in 2021. And every sector of the economy. Environmental insecurity affects how we live, what we eat, how we travel and work. Because as I told you on 21st of April, schools had to be closed, business places had to be shut down. Flood relief grants and hampers, which is a fond response of this administration, can only mitigate the effects, but they do not prevent annual floods. Some farmers up to now have not been able to resume large-scale cultivation for nearly 2 years. And now they're facing May-June rains again. What causes this flooding? Of course, you can recall that there's climate change. I think for the last 4 decades, the entire world has been conscious of climate change and rising sea levels. In Guyana now, we have to think about petroleum exploration and the exploitation of oil and gas reserves offshore and the delivery of oil and gas onshore. As you know, they've already started to clear the mangroves. And mangroves in the low-lying coastal zone are essential to the protection of the environment. You have intertidal mudflats, as you know, that some areas flood, and there are many sand reefs on beaches. And what is the mangrove forests are a separate type of forest, and those forests are necessary for the protection of the coastline. And if you strip away the mangroves, it means that the coastline is susceptible to damage. Coastal zone management is an important part of environmental security. And of course, the mangroves, like all forests, serve other purposes, like in mitigating the adverse effects of climate change. But once that barrier is damaged or destroyed, we are in jeopardy, or we who live on the coastline of Guyana will be in jeopardy. So environmental security is very important to all of us, wherever we live. The PPP administration has the distinct notoriety of having the two worst floods in human memory in this country in 2005 or 2021. The worst floods in our recent history occurred under the PPP administration, exposing citizens to liability to access to safe water, to healthcare. In the first instance, over 290,000 persons, at that time, 39% of our population, 39% were exposed to the effects of flooding. And in 2005, the situation was almost as bad. In 2021, sorry, the year before the last, situation was almost as bad. The present PPP administration acknowledged that the floods in 2021 were the worst flooding ever seen. Those are not my words. Those are not my words. Those are the words of the PPP administration, the worst flooding ever seen. So what are we going to do about it? We are certain that every rainy season, flooding will hit every region in this country, all 10 regions. And this is what happened in 2021, May, June, when the president himself was obliged to declare a disaster. And the worst effects were felt in the Pomeroon Supernam, Maika Borbis, East Berbice Quarantine, Taros Kuyuni Mazruni, and the Upper Demerara Berbice, and things are always bad in some areas. For example, in Upper Demerara Berbice, Kwani will flood. That is a certainty when the May June rains come. And many other areas, mining areas in Region 8, Region 7, will also be flooded. Sometimes, even without the May June rains coming, there's flooding in Cuyuni and the Venamu. But flooding is aggravated because of deforestation. Sometimes the farming is recklessly done. Logging, people just cutting down too many trees, to export the logs. Mining, if you fly over some areas of the hinterland, particularly Region 7 or Region 8, you see these huge holes. Once there are no trees, and you have those areas which have been denuded of forests, you get not only medical problems, health problems in terms of malaria, but you'll also get environmental problems because there are no trees to hold the soil together. And what happens is that this deforestation would lead to the decline in the ability of the environment to maintain not only its forest cover, but to perform its functions and try to mitigate the effects of global warming. So there are the side effects, for example, the depletion of animal life, plant life. And, I always like to quote the indigenous proverb, nobody knows which indigenous group said it, but it makes sense to me that trees hold up the sky, and if you cut the trees down, the sky will fall. Well, some problems are occurring in Guyana in which the sky seems to be falling because so many trees are being cut down. Nobody is talking, nobody in executive position talking much about the environment now. They talk about oil and gas. People are getting drunk with oil and gas. But they're not talking about protecting the environment. This is what we're speaking about this morning, environmental security. And we have to control the reckless farming, reckless logging, reckless mining. And we have to keep a close watch on protecting the environment for even offshore exploitation of our petroleum resources, oil and gas. Without that protection, there will be erosion, and the rains will have a more serious effect on communities. Not only polluting the waterways, but depleting areas which could be used for farming. And sometimes you hear about, global warming. Sometimes we hear about El Nino. Well, we don't have to go into the geographical explanation about El Nino, but this is not a matter that Guyana or the government could handle. This is a matter for the whole northern South America, particularly on the western side of South America. It's called ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, which means that the temperature in western South America suffers some certain irregularities, Central Pacific, Eastern Pacific, and so on. But we wouldn't go into that. But El Nino is an important phenomenon which affects the climate in Guyana. And therefore, when we speak of environmental security, we speak about the effects of El Nino. We also speak of the effects of climate change, and particularly rising sea levels, which in some areas, in Guyana could be as much as 10 millimeters annually. Although the global average is just about 2 to 4 millimeters, in Guyana it could be 10 millimeters, which means that our low-lying coastal zone is more susceptible to rising sea level than some other parts of the world. And it threatens our built environment, that is our sea defenses and our houses. It threatens our agriculture. It threatens the natural environment, particularly the mangrove forests. And if some of you have the ability or the resources or the opportunity to fly over the coast of Guyana, you'll see that the mangroves are being destroyed. Some of the mangroves from the air look like, even if you have a drone, send it and see. Some of the mangroves look like matchsticks. And you can see cocers which are isolated several meters out to sea. They're no longer protecting the land, they're surrounded by water. Cocers are standing like monuments. And those monuments are monuments to environmental insecurity. So we are not in a good place as far as the environment is concerned. We therefore need to look at what measures are being taken. We have something called the NDIA, the National Drainage and Irrigation Authority. Well, it works good for rice and sugar, but it doesn't work well for the nation as a whole. NDIA, quite frankly, is more preoccupied with the areas which are important to agriculture. That is the coastal regions between region 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And even where it works well, we must bear in mind that the bulk of the country is not effectively covered by NDIA. That is the other hinterland regions. And there has been some late response to the flood of 2021. I think the last budget provided about $13 billion. But that money, $13 billion, wouldn't go very far. It can only maintain or maybe upgrade, maybe repair the infrastructure. It cannot replace existing drainage and irrigation systems. So in effect, we are still using an obsolete and ineffective drainage and irrigation system. And we are depending on upgrading, not replacing. What we need is a whole of country irrigation system, and NDIA is not in that league. And then we have things like the National Task Force on Flooding. Heaven knows what that National Task Force on Flooding. It is reactive. It is under a minister, a very senior minister, who has to do with everything else about, the media, about communications, about posts, and really, the National Task Force on Flooding can only provide some hampers. It can relieve distress, but it cannot prevent disaster. We are looking in Ghana for an organism, an organ, a mechanism, an institution which helps to prevent disaster, recurrent disaster every May, June. And the National Task Force can tell you that you're under flood, but then again, you're under flood. Perhaps a hamper will come along your way, but it will not prevent disaster this year or next year. Something else has to be done. The PPP administration has the experience of the two worst disasters. And yes, they eventually started only last year, in March 2022. Only last year, the PPP started a national consultation on strategic flood protection measures. That it took the two worst disasters for the PPP to wake up and start a conversation. There's no plan. They're starting a consultation, which began in March 2022. Heaven knows how long that consultation will take place and when the measures will actually be put in place. What we need is more infrastructure. What we need is a plan. There's no plan. My administration had taken the lead to coordinate a national response, not just a coastal response, a national response. We established a Department of the Environment so that we could get away from the silos where climate change is working here, environmental protection is working. So they were brought under a single department, and you can see from the loud shouting from civil society, the dissatisfaction with the measures that are being put in place to protect our environment. Under the coalition, the DOE was moving towards fulfilling Guyana's commitment under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. But once the PPP got in August 2020, they miniaturized the department. Nobody hears about the Department of Environment anymore. And they just chucked it on the Ministry of Natural Resources. That is what happened. It is now minuscule. It has no voice. It has no clout. Our administration had promulgated a national climate change policy and an action plan 2020 to 2030. So technically and theoretically, that action plan has not, been completed. And there was a consultative process, and the plan examined and addressed gender and vulnerable communities, indigenous people. It's a whole of country plan. We looked at climate change, we looked at goals, we looked at guiding principles. And then, of course, the APNU AFC promulgated a Green State Development Strategy. And of course, as soon as the PPP got in it, they threw it out of the window. It was really a case of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And they reworked the old local carbon, low carbon development strategy, LCDS, and picking ideas from our Green State Development Strategy. The local carbon development strategy is obtuse. It's opportunistic. I mean, it is a money-making scheme to squeeze money out of the developed economies in Europe and so on. It is useful in part, but it is not whole of country in the way that the Green State Development Strategy has attempted to be. What is the way forward? This program, as you know by now, my friends, is not concerned with complaining. It's concerned with planning for the future to make the good life accessible to all Guyanese. And we feel that there should be a national floodplain management scheme, what we call the NFMS. And that scheme is meant to develop a whole of country approach to mitigate the impact of flooding, and in some cases to prevent flooding, so that all Guyanese could live in comfort, rain or shine, sunny weather or rainy weather, on the coastline and on the hinterland. NDIA is not enough. We need more. And we have earmarked certain, I would say, priorities for the national floodplain management system. The first is climate change. Climate change is an important item on the national agenda. And we must ensure that everything that has to do with climate change, including destroying our mangroves, cutting down our forests, excessive mining and clearing of the land, the siltation of our rivers, everything that concerns the mitigation of the adverse effects of climate must be given priority. Right now, they're being kicked aside because not everybody, most people are concerned with what we can get out of oil and gas. But environment is here forever. Oil and gas will run out. Oil and gas will run out one day, but the environment will be here forever. So climate change monitoring is top priority. Those of us who live on the coast, and most Guyanese live on the coast of the country, we have to pay attention to coastal zone management. And I repeat, those of you who can afford, or those of you who can search on the internet for YouTube or videos or drone images of what is happening on the coast, the Shell Beach to the mangrove forest, you can see the danger that we are facing. And people are not speaking about that danger. People are only speaking about what they can get out of oil and gas. They're not speaking about protecting the environment. Coastal zone management is important. The next factor that we must look at is the construction, or if not the construction, the reconstruction of a network of canals and reservoirs and artificial lakes to contain floodwater and to maintain existing waterways, including the outfalls of rivers. This is a big problem. And at the end of the 2005 floods, it was one of the factors that the rivers were so badly silted up especially the outfalls, that the flood waters could not run off the land and into the ocean. And recommendations were made. So clearing the outfalls, even of canals in towns and cities, is a continuous process, because on another occasion we deal with solid waste management, the excessive use of plastics and throwing these debris into the waterways. But outfalls have to be cleared. I remember visiting, during a flood in South Rhine Belt and seeing in South Georgetown, not South Rhine Belt, South Georgetown, and seeing a housewife, and she came out with a broomstick. She said, "Look, Mr. Granger, look, the drains are clear." And she started hitting the concrete. It is not a problem in the community. Stop blaming us. It's a problem with the outfalls. It's a problem where that the water has nowhere to go. So this is an important factor in environmental security. And we then have to look at the capacity building of, that is to say, the regions have to be involved. The neighborhoods have to be involved. This is not a matter for the central government alone. It means that there must be capacity building throughout the regional and neighborhood system. That is the importance of local government elections, which people are getting in a frenzy about. It's not about who wins, this village or this town. It is about how the environment is managed. And unless the government, whoever forms the government, is prepared to empower the RDCs and the NDCs and the municipalities, it's not about seizing power in the municipality, taking over Georgetown. It's a matter of ensuring that whoever runs Georgetown has the assets, has the resources to ensure that the environment is secure. That is, you cannot hold the city to ransom, the capital to ransom, regions to ransom, just because you don't like the party that is running it. That is what causes, the distress that we're facing in Guyana today. So I leave this guideline with you. Let us pay more attention to climate change monitoring, to coastal zone management, to the construction of a network of canals and reservoirs and maybe even artificial lakes to contain floodwater, and to capacity building so that the governmental system, national, regional, and neighborhood, could have an integrated, holistic approach, comprehensive approach to flood prevention. You cannot rule out the neighborhoods. That's where the flooding starts, in the neighborhoods. You go ask Miss Ellis that I spoke of at the beginning of this program. Every Guyanese should be entitled to the good life. And, the words of Trisha Banks Ellis, the words of Trisha Banks resonate. We are sick and tired of this. Every time a little rain falls, the streets flooding. Well, all Guyanese should be sick and tired of the flooding, and we should tell the government that we need better. We need to be able to bring our children in safe and secure societies. We need greater environmental security if we are to have that good life. And we can have that good life. Thank you for listening. May God bless you all.
Each man must